This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast. Brad's laughing at me. I am Russ, and this is my brother Kyle. We are brothers of the Serpent, and we are hosting along with Bradley. How are you doing, sir?
Man, I'm good. You know what? And we'll get to talk about something eventually here. We haven't even brought it up, but we had a damn earthquake I felt roll through my neighborhood just a couple days ago. So, yeah, we want to talk about that. We can bring that back up later. But, yeah, I'm good, man.
So it didn't knock anything down? You felt it, though?
Well, yeah, I mean, just quick review. I've never been in an earthquake as far as I knew. There's been some up toward Hot Springs, which is toward Knoxville from where I am near Asheville, and they've been pretty small. But, yeah, this was a 5+ on the North Carolina-Virginia border.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it was early morning Saturday, and I was laying in bed, half awake, so I'm trying to decide whether to get up or whatever. And, it startled me. And then I hear the creaking, the buildings on down Main Street here, it's different properties, but they're all butted up against each other. So, they move. So I heard this creaking like coming at me. And then I got a bump and it went on down the street. And I was like, holy bleep, I was like, man, I think that was like a seismic wave.
Wow,
that was amazing. First time I ever been through anything like that. But yeah, it went down the road. Yeah, and I felt a bump. Yeah, the seismic wave hit probably 120 miles away from the epicenter.
Wow.
Yeah,
I've never experienced an earthquake, so
What time of day was it, Brad?
It was 8:08, so 8:10 in the morning. Yeah.
Okay.
Saturday morning.
I think some people actually felt that here.
Augusta, there's reports. I'm not sure about Atlanta, but yeah, probably.
Yeah, I heard some things.
Yeah, it was 5+. There's only been 2 others since 1900. They were in that scale, and they were much closer to where I'm in Asheville, but both of them in the early 1900s, so really practically 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, and, it made me think. I mean, I brought this up in one of the early episodes, and who knows who's paying attention to this and how much reality there is to it. But we talk about how it's an integrated solar system, right?
Yeah.
I was told by an astrologer that Uranus was passing through Aries, and there were going to be several years of much more prominent geological events and earth changes. And it's really been true for the past, whatever it's been, year or so. So anyway, that just came to mind also when I thought about that.
Okay, so that was they're saying was a 5.1.
5.1, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's also new sunspots now. We're coming out of solar minimum, so the sun has had between 11 and 20 sunspots in the past couple of weeks too. So
okay,
and those have been flaring, and those can possibly be connected with seismic events, maybe. So
okay.
There's also a volcano.
I wasn't aware of that,
off.
so tie that in.
Yeah, a volcano just started going off in Indonesia too. Big one.
All right.
So, before I move to Mike, what's that behind you there, Brad? What are we looking at?
It's been many episodes since I showed this, but it's Lower Grand Coulee, and it's Dry Coulee coming in from. This is Dry Coulee, and back here is Lower Grand Coulee going south toward the Soap Lake, where the Scablands trip's going to be. Based out of. Yeah, coming up next month.
Yeah. All right, Mike. How are you doing? You didn't feel the earthquake?
I did not feel the earthquake, but I was asleep at 8 o'clock Saturday morning. So
it was a totally normal Saturday for you.
Totally normal Saturday for me. Things are normal in the normal household. Thank you.
That's what we expect.
That is. You're living up to expectations here on Kosmographia, Mike. Thank
As
you.
low as they are, but thank you very much.
I'll warn you, if you're looking for excitement, don't go to Mike's.
How are you doing, Randall?
I'm doing great. What can I say? I'm doing great.
Yeah.
Busy, God.
Busy.
And yeah, coming up with content for the new website launch. Just when I think I've got it all, I get another action list.
Oh, yeah.
But I think I've got the final action list done. I think. I'm hoping.
Yeah.
Please.
If it's not launched by the time this is published, then we've done something terribly wrong. It should be live. Should be live. RandallCarlson.com.
Shouldn't have said that, Brad.
Yeah.
I know.
I mean, you still got to write the TPS reports.
Edit.
All right. So what's the topic this week, Randall?
We'll kind of pick up the theme here. We've been talking about proxies, and mostly what we've been talking about is the micro scale proxies.
Right.
And I know you've been itching to get into the macro scale stuff.
Yes.
Dang
it.
I like that too. I love that. But you know, the microspherules and the magnetic grains and the carbon spherules and the nanodiamonds is all really critically important stuff. And I just want to, reiterate this fact that this is stuff now that we have the technologies, the energy dispersive spectroscopy, the transmission electron microscopy, all of that, the high resolution transmission electron microscopy. We have all of these technologies that now allow us to see this stuff that we couldn't see, 40, 50 years ago. We could only speculate. And so this to me is a really interesting development that so we have a situation where the microscopic and the macroscopic are complementing each other. And I cited last week the one really good example that we had of this occurring in our discussions we've been having here over the past few months is the Lake St. Jean. And because when we first started talking about that as an potential impact site, I had not seen the studies for Melrose yet. And the studies for Melrose basically is the microspherules, whose geochemical signature is that of the bedrock around Lake St. Jean. So that's a very interesting correlation because obviously the microspherules are microscopic and cannot be really seen with the naked eye or identified, but Lake St. Jean is a big old lake in a basin with a huge outflow channel cut there on the eastern rim. So we haven't proven anything, but it certainly is coincidental that we have these impact-produced microspherules that have to be produced under extraordinary conditions of heat and pressure, and they are associated with what we independently looked at geomorphically and surmised that it might be a possible impact created feature. So that to me was tremendously exciting, and that happened real time on the show here because we, like I said, and we need to get the fella that I can't remember his name who put us onto it, because after the initial studies that I did on Lake Nipigon, that's when I noticed I was looking for other similar features as Lake Nipigon, which was 5 or 6 years ago, I guess, when I first looked at, maybe longer, time goes so fast, looking at Lake Nipigon as a potential impact site. Then when I segued around to see if there were other features similar, that's when I saw Lake St. Jean. And I looked up the maps and I thought, yeah, that's worth coming back to. And did not come back to it until the gentleman sent us the comment about, have you guys looked at Lake St. Jean?
I think his name was Kyle also, because we said it's not this Kyle, but the Kyle that knows about Lake St. Jean. But yeah, I don't remember the first time we started looking at Nipigon. It's been quite a while, but that's where I always trace the Carolina Bays trajectory back to. the common source now, they're looking at Saginaw Bay in Michigan, but that's not where I was looking. I was always tracing those Carolina Bays back to
Nipigon
personally. Yeah, we talked about that long ago. Yeah, 15 years ago.
Yes, and what really convinced me was the studies by James Teller and others that were putting the dating of the catastrophic outflow at 12.9, right at the Younger Dryas boundary. So that to me was, well, boy, that's another coincidence. If Nipigon was not an impact site, then we still got the basic problem of how do you induce these catastrophic melting episodes. So now Kyle, we talked, I think we ended last week by looking at this recent study on volcanism or volcanic imprint in Hall's Cave that we've talked about previous, that you guys were going to try to visit at some point, and you actually reached out to Thomas Stafford.
Yep.
And he agreed that he could possibly get us in there to have a look, right?
Right. And we're now working with George and a couple other people, maybe Chris from Dabbler's Den to get in there. Yeah. So we may be doing that. George is going to reach back out to Tom, and so we're going to see if we can get a hold of the landowners and maybe get in there. Yeah.
Well, that would be really awesome.
Especially since this new paper came out. I'm like, we got to get in there. Yeah.
Right.
I can tell. I can get in there and take one look and prove that paper wrong. I'll be able to do it just by looking at it.
Well, see, I'm not saying that the paper's wrong. I'm fully accepting the fact that they found an isotopic signature of osmium that is consistent with a mantle source.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
I totally accept that.
Yep.
But it's the conclusions
to infer from that somehow now has refuted all of this other massive evidence that we've been going over and really have not even gone over half of it yet, if maybe a quarter of it. How does that refute the paper we looked at last week by Kurbatov, if that's how you say his name, finding the nanodiamonds in the Greenland ice layer? Doesn't refute that. So are they saying that because they found this osmium isotopic signature in the sediments in Hall's Cave that's consistent with a mantle source, therefore those nanodiamonds don't mean anything?
Or that they must come from volcanic reactions instead of cosmic ones? Is that what they're trying to imply?
Yeah. So you're going to, but the only other place similar, as we talked about, the only other place that similar, if not almost identical nanodiamonds have been found is at the Cretaceous Tertiary Impact.
Yeah, at the KT, yeah.
The KT, which by the way has been changed to KPG, which I'm going to protest that. Look, it was so easy to just say KT. What are you supposed to say now? KPG? Pudge? The K-Pudge boundary.
They're changing it to Paleogene. Is that what it is?
Yeah, Paleogene.
You have to be over 13 to pay attention to it.
Yeah. But I recognize, yes, K-PG stands for Paleogene.
K-PG-13 is what Brad is saying. PG-13.
PG-13. Got it. Okay. I was a little slow on the draw with that one, only because I was thinking...
It's 12.9 rounded off.
Yeah, it's right.
Yeah, 12.9. Right. You can't get in to see this movie until you are 12.9 years old.
That's right. So we have this phys.org if you want.
Yeah, let's look at that.
Yeah.
Let's look at that to see how. And you say Martin Sweatman, his we'd like to look at his, and we should get him on the show if he's willing to come on.
Yeah,
and he's written a refutation to this paper. I understand.
He's published a video where he goes through it and just pretty much destroys it.
Yeah, he's bashed it well.
Yeah.
So what does he say? Okay, so here's phys.org. So look at the spin. Texas cave sediment upends meteorite explanation for global cooling. I guess the operative term here is upends. What do you mean upends? It upends. So upends.
And they, I mean, is it that they want the explanation for global cooling to be not cosmic, right? That's the basic idea.
I think that's it. I think that there's a real resistance to like looking outside, on the part. Yeah,
right.
They don't want it to be exogenic or whatever you would call it.
We live on the Earth. Don't bother us with the rest of the solar system or the cosmos or the universe. Yeah, it's too much for us to handle. We live on Earth.
On a lighter note, I was really excited to get my first look inside Hall's Cave when this story came out. I saw this picture. I was oh man,
yeah.
Look at that
scale on that with the guy standing there. Yeah,
that is.
I know that is pretty awesome. That's the best part of this is the photograph.
Right.
So
I know where some other caves are that kind of look like
we
that.
might be able to find some YD sets. And some
it's like we talked about earlier. They complained about the critics Pintar and Ishman there in 2008 complained about the science by what was it? The science by press release.
Press release, yeah.
Right, and then Mike told us more recently. It's like, okay, well they got a better PR department. So somehow they got on that scam and said, well, we're gonna have better press releases than the other side. So it's now what's happening. They're showing these press releases with those critical titles, and it's steering people's opinions because that's the only thing that a lot of people read.
Give us your breakdown, Mike.
It's the same. I haven't read the paper, and all I can say is it's just more of the same. Lazy reporting, and reporters are generalists, as I said before, and when they're confronted with something that's really technical like this, they tend not to, or they don't have the knowledge to be able to push any further. They go with the accepted viewpoint. They'll go to a guy like Boslow or one of the other authorities and say, well, what do you think about this? And they'll say, oh, that's just hogwash. You don't believe that. Let me tell you why you shouldn't believe that. And so the challengers then are basically stuck with trying to prove their case to an unwilling audience.
Right.
It's and as we discussed in the past, it's not a case of conspiracy. It's don't attribute to maliciousness what you can excuse by incompetence.
That's right.
Well,
fantastic breakdown there from the recovering journalist.
That's right.
Yes, a very astute and erudite.
And I will say that having, I've been in this position myself, and I've had to basically rely on what people are telling me, and you get yourself caught in a bind sometimes because you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Now, don't go all Donald Rumsfeld on us here, buddy.
Well,
it's an unknowns.
Okay, so interestingly, let me show you a paper. Now. See this. So we've got this paper that just came out in 2020. Let's jump back a decade and take a look at an article that came out. And I think this is very instructive here. This was Science, the journal Science, which is got good journal. I look at it, I read it frequently, but it is kind of mainstream, and they're going to do a lot of something very similar to phys.org, I think. But yeah, so this came out in 2010 in the wake of the Suravel paper that we've already talked about, which we're going to come back to because at some point it's going to be good to go right down the list of all of the objections to the impact hypothesis that have been proposed and presented in the last, say, 15 years or so, since 13 years since it was first presented in 2007, right? And then go down the list also that there's another side. There's a rebuttal of the rebuttal. And what seems to happen is that in the mainstream, like right here, we're seeing the rebuttal, but not the rebuttal of the rebuttal. But I find the wording of this very interesting because after a new study in the subtitle here, first they say mammoth killer impact flunks out. right? After a new study fails to find nanodiamonds, impact experts are flatly rejecting outsiders' claims that an impact 12,900 years ago devastated the megafauna. So here you're seeing that the experts and the outsiders are being divided and defined really by ideological propensity there. That's what this is. It's come down to ideology. So if you accept the fact, or if you reject the fact that something's from out there could have been a trigger, that puts you on one side of the fence. If you believe that the something happened from originating from out there, now you're one of the outsiders. Now it's interesting that when you look at the list of credentials of both sides, you see that this is just semantics here that they're playing with. I mean, some of the people that are on the comet proponent team or the impact proponent team are certainly some of the most highly credentialed people on the planet when it comes to identifying this kind of material.
Well, you can see which one is the cooler story. They went to the artist and they were like, hey, we're doing a story about how this comet impact that destroyed the megafauna didn't actually happen, and these guys found stuff that basically refutes it. So we need some artwork for that. And the guy was like, holy crap. So he drew the mammoth with the comet in the background.
Yeah. It's like, yeah. Okay. Right. But here's the thing. See, they didn't, you say, what you just said, the wording you used was interesting. That they found something to refute it. Well, no, the thing is they didn't find anything.
They found
nothing.
They didn't find anything to confirm it.
Yeah. Right. Yes. So they yes, that's it. They didn't find anything. And then as we got into this was episodes ago, we did talk about this, not completely. We just touched upon it. The idea of what basically they used the wrong protocols and the research,
wrong way, wrong tools.
Proponents showed that. They showed, look, you use the wrong protocols. If you don't use the right kind of microscope, if you don't, you don't use the right sieve size, if you don't take the sample from the right place, etc. Yeah, no wonder you didn't find any. And they went through item by item, each of the deviations between the two protocols used by the different teams. And so when you go through that, I mean, who comes out looking like the experts?
Yeah, the Comet Research Group.
I would say so. Yeah, I would say so. And what's interesting is they
had to take them to school on the protocols.
Yeah, that's right.
What now?
They had to take these guys to school on the protocols. Like, here's how you do it, guys.
And here's some of the outsiders. Here's James L. Bischoff, PhD, U.S. Geological Survey, expert in geochemistry and paleoclimatology, author of 192 scientific papers. Ted Bunch with Northern Arizona University, over 280 scientific papers to his credit. 98 of his papers were on meteorites. 78 of them were on impact craters. He has had over 50 years of experience investigating both experimentally and naturally shocked materials, asteroid impact craters, lunar samples, terrestrial mineralogy, and petrology, as well as meteorites.
So they're outsiders to upholding the status quo.
Well, yeah, these are the people are saying,
they're daring to look at something new and project things forward.
And who are the impact experts? Is that Boslow?
Yeah, Boslow and Suravel and Pinter and those guys. That's the experts.
I thought Suravel was like an archaeologist or something.
Well, let's see. Then you have Paul S. DeCarli, who's now deceased. He was with the Stanford Research Institute, who's an expert on shock effects in materials. And along with colleagues, DeCarli was the first to use shock processes to form amorphous quartz, the first to synthesize diamond, masculinite, and stishovite, performed extensive studies on shock effects in meteorites. Richard Firestone. He's a scientist with the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and leader of the Isotopes Project. It goes on. Mostafa Hayek. He's Canadian research chair, head of the Department of Geological Sciences, University of Manitoba. He's an expert in isotopic and environmental geochemistry. Isabel Alcantara is with the Institute of Metallurgical Research. James Kennett. He's a paleoceanographer, a paleoclimatologist, professor emeritus at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He's a marine geologist and expert on impact phenomena. He has authored or co-authored almost 600 scientific articles published in the peer review literature. And the list goes on and on. But these are the outsiders who've been refuted by the experts.
The experts.
Yeah. See, this is such a perfect example of how media puts the spin on these stories. And then you got to go, why are they putting this spin? Why are they not giving a fair and balanced presentation of the legitimate points of controversy here? Why are they putting this spin on it? That's my question. Is there an agenda, or is it just something? Is it just there's an innate fear of things like, because we're talking about?
Well, because
stay in the box.
It depends on what you're reading. If you're reading a scientific journal, that's where you'll get, the debate, a back and forth debate. But if you're reading popular press, newspapers, magazines, even science magazines from the newsstand, what they're covering is the controversy. What they want to cover is the controversy. They're not covering the story. They're not covering the debate between Boslow and whoever. What they're covering is the controversy. That's a standard practice. It's like it's like covering sports or anything else. They're interested in the conflict.
Right, but it just seems like we won't see another similar graphic where it says, the comet impact experts have refuted, the terrestrial people, and they've shown that they're not going to do that. It's always positive on one side, and it's always supporting the standard model.
Because it is the standard model.
That's right. Yeah.
And at some point, the standard model, if it
will change,
if it's ever overturned, that will become the new standard model. But it's the same thing with the Chicxulub crater and the evidence for that. The debate about that raged for years until finally somebody said, "Oh, look, there is a crater here."
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. But with the KT stuff, it didn't carry the same political connotations as this one does. Because a lot of the faction that's opposing this are advocates of some variant of the overkill hypothesis. That humans, and even though that idea has been becoming less and less credible with the last few decades, what we've seen is a revival of that idea that has gone concurrent with this notion that humans are now causing a mass extinction that's equivalent to the Great Five in Earth history.
Yeah, it's the misanthropic angle, basically.
It is. And that is also going in hand with that humans are now in the driver's seat as far as climate change. See, not what I think is a realistic perspective that humans are, influencing climate change. Of course they are. We are. But, that humans are in the driver's seat is making now a big leap, especially when you study paleoclimatology for a few years and you begin to realize, good Lord, this climate of this planet has been a hell of a lot more dynamic than people have realized. And it's not getting the kind of mainstream press. That's why people don't understand how much the climate has changed naturally over the millennia and over the tens of millennia and so on. And that idea goes hand in hand with the idea that we are now causing the sixth great mass extinction. And absolutely, we're going to devote some time to talking mass extinctions. We're going to look at the Permian Triassic, the great dying when 95% of all species on Earth disappeared, marine and terrestrial. We'll look at the late Ordovician, which was actually more extreme than the Cretaceous Tertiary because of those great five. The KT, the dinosaur extinction, is right in the middle. The two of them were worse. Two of them were almost as bad, but not quite as bad. But when you begin to realize some of the factors that were involved in the mass extinction, you got to wonder how species, anything even survived at all. But we're going to look at that. And you're going to realize that, when that impact hit and we had 3 months of total darkness, global acid rain with a pH similar to battery acid, when the atmosphere was so choked with dust, and we have dual fact because we have the Deccan traps being extruded out, dumping millions of tons of sulfur dioxide into the air at the same time that the impact happens. I mean, once you start getting into the specifics that we now know about it, you realize, wait a second, hold it, time out. What's going on now cannot possibly compare to what happened to the planet during the Cretaceous Tertiary event. Because the last time I looked out the window, like today, when I got up and I looked out, the sun was shining. And I noticed that, and I thought to myself, okay, good, because this is not the beginning of 3 months of total darkness and a cosmically induced impact winter that could trigger the next ice age. And the rain that came down today did not have a pH of battery acid, because from what I see, the trees are not dissolving, and my Jeep is still looking okay out there. So, those sort of processes make me think, okay, we're not right at this moment in the middle of a KT level extinction event. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's what one of the arguments they try to make is that these weren't, that they didn't happen immediately. This extinction took 10,000 years to completely happen or whatever.
Well, see, I agree with that. I agree that it didn't happen immediately. But before we then are going to have any...
But an impact kills everything really quick. I mean, yes, the
really
extinction
quick.
Then...
Now, the question is, though, that I think we need to look at is that, for example, now we've got this opinion amongst a lot of very highly distinguished, highly credentialed people that adding 100 parts per million of carbon dioxide is going to trigger a climate catastrophe, right? So basically, using simple ratios, that means that that since pre-industrial revolution, carbon dioxide has gone up about 100 parts per million. So that works out to be about 1 molecule of carbon dioxide for every 10,000 molecules of air. Okay, if we're willing to entertain the idea that one additional molecule of CO2 out of 10,000 molecules of air could in some way trigger a climate catastrophe, we have to accept the possibility that a 6-mile asteroid the size of Mount Everest closing in on the Earth at 40,000 miles per hour, 10 times the speed of a rifle bullet, impacting with a force of 100 million megatons, that might just cause some climatic repercussions. At least that would be my perception of it. So I would think we should at least consider the possibility that impacts do cause climate change and a whole lot of other things. Maybe things that there could be geomagnetic response to that. I think that's very plausible. That was, I think, first proposed by Billy Glass back in the 70s, that there might be in Michael Rampino and a number of others, that there might be a correlation between geomagnetic field reversals and excursions and great impacts. It's been proposed that there could be a correlation between great impacts and prolonged episodes of volcanism. So now if you have an impact, the impact is instantaneous, but it induces such instabilities into the planet that might take thousands of years to play out, or at least centuries or decades. So, and if volcanoes, well, perfect example. We talk about somehow we got to get rid of 5 or 6 or 7 million cubic miles of ice piled up, on the planet 15 to 20,000 years ago, and that's got to all be gone by 7,000 or 8,000 years later. That poses some real problems. How do we get rid of that ice that quick? Like if we were tasked with getting rid of all the ice on Greenland and Antarctica today, we still wouldn't have as much ice to get rid of as we did during the end of the late glacial maximum when we had the Laurentide, the Cordilleran, and the Fennoscandian ice sheets all mantling the northern hemisphere, and it, not even counting the expanded montane glaciers all over the planet. So that's the problem. That's the problem. It has not been solved yet. Is how do you do that? How do you do that? Where does the energy come to melt that much ice that quick? And clearly what we're about to get into now as we shift into the macro scale is you're going to see firsthand the geomorphic imprints right in the surface of the earth for these gigantic megafloods, meltwater episodes of inconceivably humongous volumes of water discharging off the ice sheets, creating, canyons and cataracts and point bars that are miles long and picking up and entraining boulders that might weigh 5,000 tons or 10,000 tons and moving that stuff. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of energy that was expended over large areas of the Earth's surface at the end of the last ice age. And that energy had to have a source. And none of these guys that are going, talking about, it was the Paleo Indians with their spear points and their Birkenstocks that hunted all of the mammoths to extinction, right? But that doesn't have anything to do with these giant climate spikes that we see transitioning from Pleistocene to Holocene, from the beginning of the Balling Alorod to the end of the Balling Alorod, the beginning of the Younger Dryas to the end of the Younger Dryas, et cetera, et cetera. We don't see that, right? Or the collapse of the Clovis culture. We'll just look and ignore the evidence that there was a human population collapse. Because if all of these things are happening simultaneously, then it is incumbent upon us to try to see if there is possibly some common cause behind all of these various things happening, right? Because see, that's the problem that the skeptics are confronted with, is that they've got to say, well, these are all basically unrelated things. It's just coincidental that these happened all roughly at the same time. So, secondly, and we're going to explore this idea that and this is the idea that we're going to get back to, and maybe we could get some of these guys on the show at some point, but the idea that there could be, let's call them bombardment epochs, where not just a single impact coming randomly from space and slamming into the earth, but a more organized periodicity to impacts. And that impacts may not just come as isolated random events, but actually may be clustered. And that sometimes impacts may actually involve multiple objects. So these are all new ideas that maybe aren't that new, but they're ideas that have not yet made it into mainstream thinking. And I think what we're looking at here is, as we hone in on the evidence and the phenomena that we see associated with the transition out of the last ice age, that some type of a multiple impact event clearly played a role. Not maybe exclusively, because we could be looking at a solar event as well. And we raised this question last week. What about the 14,600 event, Meltwater Pulse 1A? What caused that? Or what caused the Meltwater Pulse 1B at the end of the Younger Dryas, which is the famous 11,600 year ago date that seems to come down to us through Plato? And if there's one thing that I hope that people got out of those early speculative episodes that we did about Atlantis, is that was Plato's date. That fits now precisely for the inauguration of the Holocene, and is correlated with a large meltwater spike. So, coincidence? Well, yeah, I mean, to the skeptic, yeah, it's all coincidence. Well, I turned it off as soon as I heard him mention Atlantis. Okay, yeah. So anyway,
I just want to add, we've seen enough evidence. We've been to British Columbia and throughout parts of Canada. It's not just at the margins of the ice. It's beneath the ice, under the ice, between the different ice sheets. So, whatever was going on there, there's just all kinds of features that show catastrophic flooding. And we're going to get into that. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah. And we're going to do that in just a minute, but I'm just going to talk about this because of this paper that we just looked at, came out in 2010. Mammoth killer flunks out. while that paper is being published in early fall, we have a completely independent team now from the Firestone guys, right? Completely independent, and they're down in the Andes Mountains looking at evidence that they're finding down there that seems consistent. Now, this paper was published in late 2010 by authors William C. Mahaney, David Crinsley, and Volley Calm. I don't know who. I don't quite know how to pronounce that name, but yeah, I mean, these are geologists, ecologists, earth scientists, right? So they're down there, and here's what they found. They found fired sediment considered equivalent to the black mat impact of 12.9 thousand years ago, has been located and analyzed in the Andes of northwestern Venezuela. The black mat refers to possible fallout from an Encke comet airburst presumed to have occurred over the Laurentide ice sheet, the impact spreading ejecta over large portions of North America and Europe, making it an interhemispheric event of considerable magnitude. These possible equivalent beds in the northern Andes, first considered to result from a lightning-induced conflagration adjacent to the retreating late Wisconsin glaciation ice, are now known to have undergone intense heating upon impact to a temperature much higher than what would occur in a wet first-stage successional tundra. Analysis carried out by scanning electron microscopy and several other technologies, we can just jump over that, show massive micro disruption on grain surfaces, fractures diminishing with depth toward grain interiors, and carbon welded onto quartz and plagioclase minerals. Bubbles on some grains, possibly the result of exclusion of water of crystallization, are seen on some samples, principally quartz. The presence of copious monazite in the carbonaceous coatings is considered part of the incoming ejecta, as it is not a common indicator mineral in the local lithology. Yes, analysis of various quartz and plagioclase subjected experimentally to temperatures ranging from 500 to 900 degrees centigrade shows that intense heating affects resonant mineralogies to differing extent, with grain disruption, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, so that's what they found in Andes. So now, while this paper is being published in Science, these guys are finding this stuff in the Andes, which I find quite interesting. It says here, so the intergrowth of carbonaceous black mat material with thermally disrupted and fragmented quartz and feldspar, a welded patina of 100 to 400 nanometers thickness could only occur with temperatures in excess of 900 degrees centigrade. The event interpreted here to be of cosmogenic origin. So, very interesting stuff. The database described herein does not conclusively prove an ET impact airburst at 12.9 Ka for the black mat, as we have detected no irrefutable planar deformation features, which is one of the diagnostics, or shock melted quartz, or no nanodiamonds in the samples analyzed thus far. But the data described here highlight a mat of glassy carbon spherules fused and welded onto alluvium, firmly dated to within the Younger Dryas initiation window. The carbon-rich mat, a nanometer thick coating, is encrusted on brecciated or fractured minerals of quartz and feldspar. The disrupted mineral surfaces interpreted to result from mass impact and extreme heat. In 8 out of 10 occurrences, carbon is coated or welded onto mineral grains. And then at the same time, as this paper is coming out, another paper is coming out in November, which we talked about last week, which was the discovery of a nanodiamond-rich layer in the Greenland ice sheet, a team led by Andrei V. Kurbatov, with a bunch of other guys in there. And they found tremendous amounts of diamonds. We report the discovery in the Greenland ice sheet of a discrete layer of free nanodiamonds in very high abundances, implying, most likely, either an unprecedented influx of extraterrestrial material or a cosmic event that occurred after the last glacial episode. From that layer, we extracted N diamonds and hexagonal diamonds, or Lonsdaleite, an accepted ET impact indicator at abundances of up to about 5 million times the background levels in adjacent younger and older ice. So there, interestingly, here you have these two independent teams out there, one of them in Venezuela, one of them in Greenland, finding the signature of some type of a cosmic impact. At the same time, science is coming out and saying, impact killer flunks out. So, interestingly, did they do a follow-up story reporting on the two research papers that I just quoted from? I don't think so. No, I don't think so. So
need better PR, guys.
Yep. So, Mike, you're here. You're going to, with your background, I think you're going to be nominated to be our PR guy.
No.
No? Oh, okay.
Wow.
Okay. Well, so much
Shut
for that
down.
idea. I thought it was a really brilliant idea.
Denied.
Can't pay me enough.
Wow.
Oh, okay. So as I'm reading this, then what you're saying is you're just here for the money.
Like it's doing me any good so far.
That's true. You haven't made much
I'm
money.
here strictly for the entertainment value.
Okay. Well, at some point we've got to figure out, we got to do something nice for you, Mike.
I'm thinking about a new kitchen.
Beyond a t-shirt.
Are you really thinking about a new kitchen? Seriously?
Yeah.
We could do you a new kitchen.
I'll talk to you and Randall about it. It's you and Rowan about it at some point.
Yeah. Well, talk to me and Randall about that, and we'll see what we think. And
after the show,
I'll get with Randall and see what he has to say. He may not be interested in doing your kitchen, but I'll talk to him.
We might need a BR department though. Let's not put that off on the side. That may be coming.
A PR department.
My good buddy Ian Mackin, who we just ought to just get on the show, just because we need to have somebody on here sometime with an Irish accent.
Yeah, Ian, definitely.
He owns the restaurant that's been done for 2 months now, and just trying to get the bureaucrats to sign off on everything is taking months. That should take days. So it's crazy, but it's got to be close. And when the Wheelhouse Craft Pub and Kitchen opens, I would like to invite all of our viewers and listeners to come on down. We'll get in there and drink some
guzzle some American IPAs.
Yes, what do they call it when they do the Guinness on the bottom?
Yeah.
Black and tan.
Black and tan.
Black and tan.
Yes.
Black and tan.
I can't. I'm really looking forward to having a black and tan. That's the worst part of this. Will you open up so I can get in there and try this black and tan that I've been hearing about? That sounds really good.
It is. It is so smooth.
See. Okay, Mike, you've had a black and tan.
It's my favorite beer.
Is it really? See?
Yeah.
We got to get this place open.
Yeah, bring on Ian. Yeah.
Yeah, he'd probably get a kick out of that. Yeah, he's a hard-working fella.
He's a great guy.
Where are we on time, gents?
Well,
we're coming up on halfway-ish.
Kronos. How much time do we have left?
Well, Kronos didn't start the timer appropriately, so it's somewhere.
We're at 49 minutes.
Somewhere
folks.
About that time.
Yeah, so it's
break time.
Break time.
Okay, when we come back from the break, we are going to pick it up with what's going on around Lake Hind. We're going to finally get to that.
All right.
All right.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast. Kicking off the second segment of the show, of course, with a mention of our CBD from the gods.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I think what I have to report is something pretty special, because I used to work out a lot. I love to work out. And around 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, I started having a problem where working out, I would get horrible muscle spasms, cramps in my lower back particularly. So I've seen chiropractors and acupuncturists and gotten help and relief. But, I had to quit wearing my tool belt, actually, about 15 years ago, because I wore a tool belt for decades. And, a tool belt can be quite heavy. You might even be carrying 2 hammers. You got a pouch full of screws and nails. You're carrying maybe a couple of steel tapes, a knife. You got all kinds of stuff loaded hanging on your hips. So part of the problem, I started getting problems with my lower back. So I quit wearing my tool belt, and then, but continued to work out up until about 8 to 10 years ago. I had to really slow down, which meant that, when I couldn't work out, or go to the gym and work out, I slowly started putting on weight, which you would do, right? Well, anyways, to make a long story short, I've noticed the last 2 to 3 weeks now, I'm able to work out without getting muscle spasms, which is a very major step for me. If I can do that, work out without muscle spasms, that's a tremendous benefit to me for multiple reasons, right? And I go, what have I been doing different? And Mike Robertson said, what it does is once you get this in and your endocannabinoid system starts making these adjustments, as you will notice that inflammation goes away and chronic pains will go away. And I have been able to work out now the last 2 weeks without a single muscle spasm. And I can't prove it, but I'm guessing that it's the CBD oil, because that's the only thing I can think of that I'm doing different. And Brad knows how many times I've complained about my back and the limitations of not being able to work out. So I would say, yeah, at this point, I think I would give this my wholehearted endorsement. And I plan to continue over the next month or two. And I think, as with anything like this, it's, the benefits are not of these kinds of approaches are not instantaneous, and you shouldn't expect them to be. I think the benefits are cumulative over a time, several months, maybe even a year of using some type of a new treatment, or whatever you want to call it. And so I've been into this about a month now, I guess.
So is this something you have to take forever and ever, every day? Or do you reach a point where it's like, okay, things are good and you don't have to take it?
Well, probably. But, to me, it's like anything. There's no reason why I wouldn't continue to take some vitamin C for the rest of my life. Why not? The older I get, the more valuable it is for me to get 5,000 IUs of vitamin D in me every day. Because some days I don't get out in the sun as much as I used to. When I worked outside, it was in the sun all the time. To me, it's just like, food. It's look at it as food. You got to have food for the rest of your life. And if you get benefits from it, if eating blueberries really does help your brain get better, why not eat blueberries for the rest of your life? I'm up for that. I love blueberries. Yeah. By the way, I wish I had some right now. In fact, I think I do have some. So
best stoner
the brand ever that I've been using is the Apollo. and I'm going to really fascinated with learning about the endocannabinoid system now. And I'm going to really look into this because it really seems it's so fascinating. I mean, who knew if 5 or 10 years ago that there even existed an endocannabinoid system and how important it was to your well-being? I didn't. I had no idea whatsoever. But they got a full, they give a lot of interesting background, and CBDfromthegods.com. Check them out. And I'll get back to you with my experimentation with CBD oil over the next few weeks and months and see what happens. And if I can continue working out and exercising, order of magnitude higher than I have been, absolutely, that's going to be awesome.
Right on, man.
And I think this is still going to be effective. They've got some specials going on, and with the special coupon code RC ships free, then you, in addition to the specials that are going on, you get free shipping. So that should still be in effect. And check out CBDfromthegods.com.
It's RC ships free. Is that the code?
Yes, sir.
All right.
And that's all. That's all in the description, show notes. We got all listed for you, the links and the details there.
All right.
All right. On to Lake Hind.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to just show an example here of a let's see, a paper or several papers. We'll do this one here. Yes, history of late glacial runoff along the southwest margin of the Laurentide ice sheet. Alan Kehew and James T. Teller. This is now back in 1995. I'm guessing I probably read my first paper by Teller, certainly in the 80s. I'd have to go back and look, maybe mid 80s, late 80s, perhaps right in there. He's been writing on this for a long time, studying this for a long time. One thing he says here that's interesting, he's talking about the isostatic depression. That's important to keep in mind because the ice was pressing down on the land. You have to picture what that did. Was it caused a depression in the land? So as the ice retreated and melted back, you had this tremendous ponding of water around the perimeter of the ice sheet. Does it make sense? Right? Now, as the ice sheet is diminishing in mass, the water mass is growing, right? Until you get some kind of an equilibrium between the proglacial waters accumulating and the runoff of those waters into the ocean, right? So if it's accumulating on the south side, it's going to probably feed into the Mississippi watershed, and that water is going to be routed down to the Gulf. If it's the mid-southern range of the Laurentide ice sheet, it's going to probably end up in the Mississippi. Okay, so but as that ice is retreating back, it's also shrinking, and as the water is draining off, the mass of weight, the multi-hundred billion trillion tons of weight, is being reduced. So now the land starts lifting back up. So as it's lifting back up, what's going to happen? Accumulating waters will tend to drain off, right? Sometimes it could be that the rising of the post-glacial isostatic uplift is not always going to be perfectly uniform. There may be episodes in there where it's seismically abrupt. You see what I'm saying? Where the uplift might be actually a seismic event, 5, 6, 7, even earthquakes, right? Now, what that might mean is if you have a sudden uplift, is that you're going to have a sudden draining of those ponded waters that have accumulated around the perimeter of the ice sheet. So when we begin to look at this idea of post-glacial flooding, we have to keep that in mind, that there's a variety of processes that are ultimately going to feed into the continental hydrological system. And what we're looking at here, and I think this is one of the things that has sort of, I think, it's confusing about the dominant model of ice dam failures that we're going to be really, really looking in depth at, this idea of an ice dam and the efficacy of ice, glacial ice, to serve as a dam for water to some given pressure, right? Because anytime you accumulate water behind some kind of a barrier, whatever that happens to be, the pressure is going to be related to the depth of the water, right? It's also going to be related to if water is flowing into the system. Is water flowing into a reservoir? You have a dam, creates a reservoir. Is water flowing into the reservoir? So if you have a reservoir that's dammed, obviously you have to be draining water off somewhat commensurately with the amount of water draining in from the surrounding terrain. And if you have too much rain, it exceeds, right? The danger is that you have an overtopping of the dam. That's what happened with the Teton Dam in Idaho when that failed. It actually started by piping along the side, but the water had come up nearly to the top. So the water, once it started through, it quickly eroded the dam, and away it went. St. Francis Dam, I think, in California was an example of an overtopping dam, right? Problem is with glacial ice, if you're looking at a concrete dam or even an earthen dam, obviously the dam material is much more dense than the water that it's retaining, correct? But in the case of glacial ice, the glacial ice is going to be less dense than the water that it's retaining. So that creates a problem of physics right there that I think tends to be ignored. But the question is what's the origin of the water ultimately? That's, to me, what's being overlooked here. So anyways, coming back to Lake Hind here, and I brought that up, James Teller, because James Teller is now co-authoring papers with the Comet Research Group, which I think is a very significant milestone in these studies, because now we've got a geologist who's probably one of the world's experts on glacial paleohydrology, joining forces with the Comet research team. I think this is a really cool thing. And so this paper that came out last year, January of last year, is entitled A Multi-Proxy Study, multi-proxy, not just one proxy, but multi-proxy study of changing environmental conditions in a Younger Dryas sequence in southwestern Manitoba, Canada, and evidence for an extraterrestrial event. So they get right into the paper and they say multi-proxy analysis of a sequence spanning the Younger Dryas in the glacial Lake Hind basin of Manitoba provides insight into the regional paleohydrology and paleovegetation of meltwater rivers and lakes. So paleohydrology simply means the study of flowing water long time ago, right? Paleovegetation is, okay, what kind of vegetation was growing in a given landscape or a given terrain X number of years ago? Paleovegetation, paleo meaning old. So if you have a lake basin, that lake basin is going to see if it's a collection basin, and all kinds of pollen and organic material from the surrounding vegetation is going to make its way into that lake, isn't it? So that's going to accumulate in the sediment in the bottom of the lake. So if you go in and you look at the pollen, you look at trees will leave their pollen, and you examine that, you can tell, well, wait a second, this is larch trees and spruce trees growing here, and then they were replaced by a lot of alder trees. Well, alder trees grow in a much warmer climate. What does that tell you? So this is looking at the paleovegetation and the kinds of things that grow and thrive in a given environment. It's going to tell you quite a bit of information about what was going on in that environment, right? So that's what they're saying here, is that they do this multi-proxy analysis of this Lake Hind. I'll pull up a map here in a second. The lake was dammed by the Laurentide ice sheet, and it overflowed into Lake Agassiz. Hello, Lake Agassiz. Introducing Lake Agassiz. Lake Agassiz is going to be one of the next big things to talk about for multiple reasons. It was a phenomenal lake, and of course all freshwater, but it was really like a giant inland sea, temporarily formed, ponded against this shrinking Laurentide ice sheet. And we'll look at it in a minute. We have a massive body of water. When I pull up the map, I'll point out this position to you. When Brad and I were taking Graham Hancock on our trip across northwestern America, we went to a place called Big Stone Lake, sits right on the border of South Dakota and Minnesota. And this was, for a while, a temporary discharge outlet for this mighty glacial Lake Agassiz. Big Stone Lake is a hint right there. The name of the lake, Big Stone. Well, big stones are one of the primary clues that something big happened, like a giant flood. Big stone. So right there in the mouth is a whole array of hundreds of very big stones. And then in the lakes, the floods, the draining of Lake Agassiz through that outlet cut a channel that's now occupied by several lakes, which is very typical. And those lakes are home. It's a wildlife refuge. And I must say, when we visited there, the number of birds, I've never been anywhere surrounded by so many birds. Starlings, I mean, like a billion starlings in the trees. I mean, I kept hearing this as I'm walking up the plankway to go over to the lake. I keep hearing this kind of this hum, this buzz, almost like when we were kids and we'd put a playing card on our bike spokes and we'd go brrr. It almost sounded like that, but it was something about it was just very intense. You could almost like feel it in your bones. And when I come over and I look at the lake, what I'm seeing is that, as far as the eye can see, you got these flocks of ducks. And then about every few minutes, one of the flocks would get up like on cue and fly down to another part of the lake. And as they're flying, their wings are beating on top of the water. So you've got maybe 300, 400, 500 ducks brrr, with their wings beating on the water. It was amazing. It was just amazing. It was almost like almost a spiritual experience. And I wasn't even high or anything. I was just like in the midst of these birds, just like saturated in bird reality, and then islands out in the lake covered with hundreds of pelicans just gathered around, hanging out. Pelicans, these big old guys, 3-4 feet tall, these massive beaks. Oh, yeah. I mean, there must have been 20 different kinds of birds at least. I mean, this was bird sanctuary, bird paradise. And these birds were hanging out, man, getting all interspecies hanging out, grooving on the place. It was amazing. I want to go back.
I think when we were younger, we went to there was a cape, and it had a wildlife sanctuary on it, 7 miles of it. And we walked it one time all the way out to the point, and it was like that. The amount of animals and birds was massively multiplied from what was on the rest of the cape. So I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. It was amazing. And because to hear all that, I mean, because there were so many of them, it wasn't just a matter of hearing. It was almost you felt. And that was different for me. I'd never experienced that before. It was like I felt the bird. It was like they were all having this big glory shouting. They were all just, hey, it's an awesome day. It's sunshiny. We're so ecstatic to be here. We're all just going to shout at one time at the heavens. And God, it was wonderful. It really was wonderful.
It was an amazing place.
Yeah.
Totally. Big Stone Lake, yeah.
Big Stone Lake.
That's actually in Minnesota, near the South Dakota border, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Well,
what?
It made me want to go.
Yeah, Graham got attacked by some bugs, and he was having a rough time because he didn't like all the bugs. But I mean, there were so many birds, and it was just amazing to see all that amongst the sanctuary. and the sounds and the smells and the sights. It was really unique that day. I was sorry that Graham didn't get the same experience we did.
I know, me too. Santa did, though. She came out onto the end of the dock with me, and she just stood there immersed in this. It was the sound of all the birds, but it was also just the scene. It was the way the whole thing.
Totally.
Yeah, it was almost like it was like stage. All the birds got together and say, "Hey, we are going to put on a pageant to blow these people's minds."
They were waiting for us to show up to do their show. Yeah. No doubt.
You need a lot of bugs to feed all those birds. So
well, I don't remember any bugs. I think what it was is I know Graham had a headache that day, and we had earlier. I think we had gone out to explore amongst the rocks, the boulders, and I think that there were quite a few mosquitoes there.
Yep.
And he was getting, for some reason, they were all honing in on him. They're saying, "Hey, let's go get this English guy." You know,
let's get some blue blood here.
Yeah, they were. I mean, they were all seemed like they were honing in on poor Graham. I guess, you know, it's like, hey, this is something a little different here. You know, these.
Yeah, that's high on my list to get back to. No doubt about that.
Yeah, but once
Graham
you got out on the dock there,
foul day.
Look, with all those birds. Mosquitoes didn't stand a chance. I mean, they didn't. No, mosquitoes. So, anyways, yeah, that was a wonderful day, and the weather was beautiful, and the sky was one of those days where just the sun is just bursting through the clouds. You know, glorious day. And the thing is we had been the whole week. We got this weather front out of Portland that followed us the whole way to the very last day. And this is as we're coming to the last day. This was one of our last stops. Might have been our last stop. Was Big Stone Lake, because I wanted to check out the outlet, the southern outlet of. I mean, we went to Potholes, but that was after we got there. Remember, we did a day trip up there from Minneapolis, and we're going to show the viewers slides and pictures of those potholes, and I'll have pictures. Because we're going to talk about that. We're trying to talk now about glacial melting. Okay, so let's get back to Lake Hind, multi-proxy analysis. Okay, so here's what they did. They took a sequence from this temporary lake that was there at some point. When the ice melted back, there were certain areas that receded back and allowed the vegetation to encroach. So we have to be looking now at the initial warming at 14,600, and now we're coming down to the threshold of the Younger Dryas. So what are we looking at there? 1,600 years later. So in that 1,600 years, the ice has receded back. 1,700 years has receded back in some places enough where vegetation has encroached. And now, of course, you've got regular seasonal melting from the ice that creates a succession of lakes. This was Lake Hind was one of these. And so it was a repository of stuff. In other words, water flowing off the glacier, washing sediment in, and then in that sediment is trained a variety of organic and vegetable materials and pollen and seeds and so on and so forth. So they did 25 accelerator mass spectrometry age determinations. They say that the pre-Younger Dryas interval records rapid sedimentation from meltwaters that headed in proglacial lakes in the Canadian prairies that are known to have been catastrophically released when ice or sediment barriers were breached. Pollen in this phase is dominated by pre-quaternary forms eroded from Paleocene bedrock. Let's stop and say that again so we just don't go beyond this and people don't know what the implications of this are. Pollen in this phase is dominated by pre-quaternary forms eroded from Paleocene bedrock. Pre-quaternary means that it's older than 2.6 million years. So there's pollen in this layer, right? Right at the Younger Dryas that is pre-quaternary. Now, the pre-quaternary, where did that come from? It was eroded from bedrock, which was undoubtedly millions of years older than that. right? So now you have to think eroded from bedrock. What does that mean? Well, it means that the water that came through there and deposited this, whatever else, it was eating its way directly into bedrock. And it was exhuming the contents of that bedrock, which included these pre-quaternary pollens and things. So over 2.6 million years. Now, so it says it's dominated by those forms, eroded from Paleocene bedrock at the onset of the Younger Dryas at 12.8 thousand years ago. The sudden appearance of concentrations of nanodiamonds, high-temperature magnetic spherules, platinum, and iridium provide evidence of an extraterrestrial event that others have identified at more than 40 sites in North America. Major changes in oceans and climate and the catastrophic outflow of nearby Lake Agassiz at the onset of the Younger Dryas may be related. Now, this is all really potent, important, interesting stuff. Because here's a group of scientists now going, okay, so we've got this layer of the ET proxies that correlates with 40 other sites by now documented by at least eight different independent teams. And it correlates in time precisely with this event that's been dated now, the catastrophic outflow of Lake Agassiz. So what caused the catastrophic outflow of Lake Agassiz? Or how long had Lake Agassiz been there? I think what this might be saying, essentially, is they're saying Lake Agassiz, okay, but how long was Lake Agassiz accumulating, and why did it suddenly catastrophic outflow at 12,900 years? See? And this dates precisely with the proxies, the nanodiamonds and the microspherules. So they're saying here the catastrophic outflow of nearby Lake Agassiz at the onset of the Younger Dryas may be related to the deposition of these concentrations of nanodiamonds, high-temperature magnetic spherules, platinum, and iridium. Now, that's a huge step to say that. They may be related. Yes, Brad will testify. We were saying that 20 years ago. They're related. Not that we knew about the impact proxies. I didn't know about those 20 years ago. I don't think Brad did. I don't think really anybody did 20 years ago, knew that there were these layers of nanodiamonds precisely at that Younger Dryas boundary. However, 20 years ago, we were surmising that the flooding and the catastrophic outflows were triggered by cosmic impacts. I mean, we were thinking that and talking that and discussing that in 1998 when we made that first 2-week excursion over the Scablands. Yeah, 1998. And that 1998 trip was the culmination of really almost like 10 years of thinking and reading and research and map study and all of that from multiple different fields, not only the paleohydrology and the creation of the channel Scablands, but what was also available about impact geology up to that point, because you know that from the early 1980s on, there was a renaissance in the studies of impact-related sciences. Okay, so now we have this catastrophic outflow of glacial Lake Agassiz. So what we have to do, in a sense, is go, okay, glacial Lake Agassiz. What do we know about Lake Agassiz? How big was it? How much water was there? This catastrophic outflow. What was the discharges? How much water? And where was the catastrophic outflow? Okay, so I'm going to do a share screen here in order so people can get geographically oriented. Here we go. Let's get that a little bigger. All right. Right here. See that little blue shape? It's at the southwestern corner of Manitoba. That represents the position of glacial Lake Hind. Now, Agassiz, if you look at Lake Winnipeg and Winnipegosh, and Lake Manitoba, these lakes up here, they're all occupying basins that were part of Lake Agassiz. And right down here where this bump is on Minnesota, see that bump? That bump is right there is the location of the Big Stone Lake and is the temporary southern outlet of Lake Agassiz. So that's right down there. Now, we're going to be looking at this study that was in this lake right here, which at this time now is the most northern, it's the most northern impact proxy site that's been studied at this point. So at the Younger Dryas, then the assumption is that the ice had just receded just north of where Lake Hind is at that time, at the onset of the Younger Dryas. Okay, so they took 32 samples. They took cores from the lake, right? And then from those cores, they extracted 32 samples, right? They used scanning electron microscopy to examine the surface textures of the things they found. And then they used what's called energy dispersive spectroscopy, which is used to analyze the chemical composition of a substance. And it says that these SEM-EDS analysis are required to correctly differentiate rounded, unmelted magnetic grains and framboids from melted Younger Dryas magnetic spherules. Because one of the things that these guys got attacked on was the critics were saying, well, there are these natural little spheres called framboids that form, and what you were looking at was just these framboids that are purely a terrestrial phenomena, and they're found distributed pretty much evenly throughout all the stratigraphic column, and that's what you guys were looking at. That was one of the criticisms lobbed at the pro impact group early on was, oh, you weren't looking at anything extraterrestrial, you were just looking at these framboids. And I can actually show you some microscopic pictures of framboids next to to microspherules, impact-produced microspherules, and even the layperson is instantly going to see the difference. So these particles cannot be distinguished by limiting observations to a reflected light microscope. Now, guess what? As they say here, a number of previous studies critical of the Younger Dryas hypothesis claimed to find, quote-unquote, melted YDB spherules throughout stratigraphic columns they investigated well beyond the Younger Dryas time frame. However, slight problem, none of those studies correctly used scanning electron microscopy and energy dispersive spectroscopy as required, making it unclear whether Younger Dryas boundary high temperature impact spherules were observed at all. Also, well, so that's the whole point there. So they clearly showed that the framboids and the melted spherules are very different. Morphologically, their chemical signature is different. And if you know how to use the technology properly, you can differentiate, right? So what they're saying here is you cannot just look in a reflected light microscope. So these guys looked at these things under a reflected light microscope and couldn't tell the difference between the spherules that they were looking at, and therefore then claimed that all the spherules are just framboids. So that is another one of the criticisms that fell by the wayside, by the way. Okay, so the next slide will show a map of Lake Agassiz, so people can kind of see where you can see right here, right on the border. There's North Dakota and Lake Agassiz, and there's your Lake Hind, right? It's just separated a little bit. It's almost a part of Lake Agassiz, but not quite. And then you can see where Lake Agassiz comes down in this tongue right here, and you see where the tongue stops right at the bump on the western border of Minnesota. Right there at the end of that bump, that's where Big Stone Lake is. And for a while, that was the temporary outlet, the temporary outburst point for Lake Agassiz. but it actually had multiple. It turns out now there's evidence that it also catastrophically drained along the margin of the Laurentide ice sheet to the north, right? So the box right here, the purple box, encloses the area that we're looking at right here. See that? So there's some interesting stuff going on here, some very interesting stuff. We're going to be looking at Lake Hind, which is right in here. Then you've got this Turtle Mountain, the upland that's right here, this kind of teardrop-shaped upland. We'll be coming back and taking a closer look at that in our examinations here. So let us continue on. Here is an example of some of the things that they found at Lake Hind that will now be recognizable, I think, to most people. Here's some of your magnetic spherules that they started uncovering. Look at this one. This one actually, because these were produced in high temperature events, and there was also collisional. These in the high energy plume that these spherules formed in, these spherules are flying around colliding with each other, see? And that's what you're seeing right here. That's what you're seeing right here. These broken out parts where the spherules collided. In some cases, smaller material in the heat of it was welded to the spherules. So what they're finding there is like what's being found at dozens of other Younger Dryas boundary sites and this is what we've been talking about. So this should be becoming pretty obvious to people at this point. And then we did look at this last week. This was the spikes of nanodiamonds, platinum, iridium, sediment grain sizes. All of this was the analytical studies. There was a couple of interesting points. One was this prolonged deposition of platinum, which actually went on for about 2 decades. So it's like the planet is getting this 2-decade-long dusting of platinum. That's pretty bizarre. So Lake Hind, let's look at some maps here. I've put some maps together. This is from this is actually referenced in the paper we were just reading from, but this goes back to 2002. And this is just a simple map of the area of where Lake Hind was. And it's showing there's an oak lake, which is there now, is the last remnant of glacial Lake Hind. And a couple of things I want to show you, call your attention to, is the Serous River right down here running kind of diagonally across the screen. You've got your Trans-Canada Highway up here. You've got the Assiniboine River up here. And then these gray areas represent deposits of sand. Now, up at the top, you've got this direction rose, as it's called. And what it's showing is by looking at the grain orientation of these sand deposits, they'll find that there's a dominant direction that will be a paleodirectional indicator. In other words, look at the array of this gray material here, and you'll see it's generally very parallel to this long arrow on the directional rows. You see that? That's because this is a water moving this way across the land, depositing this stuff right here. You see that? And then you have this large deposit of sand down here that flanks the Serous River. Okay, so this is kind of the layout of it. We'll go over here to the screen on the left, and the Assiniboine River is flowing in this channel. Can you see this channel right here that kind of loops down, comes across, and loops back up? See Oak Lake over here? Okay, this is our lake right here on Google Maps, right? And this is the Assiniboine Spillway that we see just above it right here. And I think in the next slide, I'm zooming in on the spillway. Check this out. This is the Assiniboine River flowing in here. This is a huge spillway carved by glacial meltwater megafloods. If we zoom in really close, What we're seeing here is a beautiful example of an underfit river, as it's called by geologists, where the modern river is extremely small compared to the channel that it's in. And the modern river did not create the channel that it's flowing in. Now, in this case, we know that. I mean, because this channel was not, because if we go back 14,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, all of this was under glacial ice. This channel was not here, you see. This channel was produced when the glacial ice receded far enough back to expose the land and then subjected to these huge meltwater flows that came down and cut these spillways literally probably in a matter of weeks or even days, right? The modern river, Assiniboine River, logically is going to follow the ancient mega channel, right? Once any river flowing up here, right, on the upland, once it crosses into the depth of this channel, well, it's now going to be confined to the channel, isn't it? So it's now going to flow in that channel. And so we're going to see many examples of this. In fact, most rivers in North America are underfit. Most of them are. And occupy these gigantic channels that were created by these meltwater floods. So let's see, there was the high temperature magnetic spherules that they found exhibit morphologies and chemical compositions like those found in sediment dated to the Younger Dryas onset at approximately 40 other sites across nearly a quarter of the Earth's surface. The evidence is comparable to distal ejecta from known impacts and inconsistent with non-impact terrestrial mechanisms. Okay, this is from just last year, right? If the Lake Hind area was influenced by a high-energy ET event, such as the ablation or atmospheric burst of a fragmented comet or chondritic meteor, this may have produced a high-energy, think about this, a high-energy seismic pulse or a thermal pulse that briefly increased surface temperatures. Either phenomena may have led to release of meltwater into regional drainage systems through destabilization of the Laurentide ice sheet margin, including failure of glacial dams upstream from Lake Hind that were holding back proglacial lakes. In addition, a large-scale ET event would have greatly increased the outflow of fresh water from the Laurentide ice sheet into the Arctic and North Atlantic oceans, as well as releasing large fluxes of icebergs into nearby oceans. This, in turn, would have disrupted the Atlantic Ocean's meridional overturning circulation that triggered Northern Hemisphere cooling. Glacial Lake Agassiz was the largest of these ice marginal lakes that abruptly overflowed at the onset of the Younger Dryas, coincidentally at the same time as the ET event and the drawdown of waters in Glacial Lake Hind, which lies just upstream from it. So there we go. Now, let's go back to...
So they're saying a seismic pulse could have created the heat?
No, they're saying that there might be two variants of the effects. One, a seismic pulse, right? Think of Tunguska exploding in the atmosphere. Yeah. And all the talk we did about there was being possibly a seismic response, a 5-point-something earthquake was actually measured in response to that. Now, what would happen if you upsize Tunguska 10 or 100 times, or you multiplied the Tunguska by 10 or 100, Yeah. So a seismic pulse. See, a seismic pulse was induced in the Earth's crust in the area of the Tunguska explosion without that thing even striking the Earth. So
yeah, I would see that as fracturing the glacier.
Yeah.
Or the ice, you know.
And then you've got the thermal pulse. Yeah. So let's think this. Let's think this process through in our heads. Seismic pulse, what you just said, fractures. Now, of course, if there's a direct impact into the ice sheet itself, well, obviously, that's going to create a seismic event throughout the ice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the seismic, this wave, think what Brad felt when this 5.1 earthquake came through North Carolina. Imagine it's a 10.0 earthquake, right? But it's passing through the ice. What's it doing to that ice? Right? Now you got the thermal pulse. So add the thermal pulse into the seismic pulse. What you said, the seismic pulse is going to fracture the ice, right? Now you add in the thermal pulse, you're going to melt a lot of ice. So what's that water going to do? Well, is it not going to access the base of the ice sheet now quite readily because the ice is fractured? Let's assuming that it's fractured all the way to the base, which certainly could be possible. It would be. Well, I mean, look.
Yeah, and if you're having other seismic events in the actual crust, that's going to be breaking up ice underneath. You know, it can be shattering the ice underneath, even if some of the above layers were not broken up.
Well, and then you're also going to have, I would imagine now, typically in an impact, you've got this material that's thrown up and it falls back to Earth, right? Let's say you've got an object that's 1,000 feet to 2,000 feet in diameter, you know, Tunguska 150 feet. Now we're talking about an object. I say that besides because now we're talking about an object that's big enough to actually penetrate the atmosphere and strike whatever's beneath it, be that land, be that ocean, be that an ice sheet, right? It strikes the ice sheet or it blows up in the vicinity of the ice sheet. Either case, you have a large-scale fracturing. You have a large-scale thermal event that melts a lot of water. Now, if you've got an impact into the ice sheet itself, the question is that impact going to have enough energy to excavate the ice and some of the substrate and actually gouge out a crater? Now, a crater formed purely in ice is going to be just a temporary transient thing. It's not going to last long, is it? Like a crater into the earth. So you've got the transient crater in the ice. Now, just like when you have an impact into the ocean, you know, the water surges out, but then it surges back in. The geologists and oceanographers, marine geologists that have been looking at that, called that the resurge wave.
Resurge wave.
Right? Yeah. Likely you would have a resurge wave into the ice, and you're going to have a tremendous amount of water ejected, forced under the ice sheet, right? Away from the epicenter, right? And then if there's actually a basin excavated into the ground, the water is going to rush back in under pressure back into that basin. And when it does that, just like what has been observed around submarine impacts, is that there's obvious desecration of the rim, which was caused by the inrushing waters coming back in, obscuring and eliminating large portions of the upraised rim. So that's one of the consequences of the resurge wave coming back in, is it tends to erode away the raised rim that would be there in a purely terrestrial crater. You would have similar thing with impact into an ice sheet, because the resurge wave is going to come back in. It's going to be loaded with sediment, and it's going to infill the basin with sediment, and it's going to obscure the rim. So if you're thinking about looking for evidence of an impact, and see, one of the constant refrains you hear from the critics is, well, you don't have an impact crater, you don't have an impact crater, you don't have an impact crater. Well, what if we're talking about, and this is what we're talking about, is impacts into the ice sheet? Well, now, clearly, you've got to be looking for a different suite of geomorphic features. You can't be thinking, oh, we're going to go out and find something that looks like Meteor Crater, Arizona, and it's going to date to the Younger Dryas boundary. No, that's not what we're going to find. So the key, I think, is mapping the meltwater events. And there were multiple meltwater events. That's where it gets really kind of sticky and interesting. But let's look at some more maps while we're at it while we still have some time here. We'll do another share screen.
Zeus made himself a cosmic slushy.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so we saw Oak Lake. All right, so in this Google Maps, if you look at this little area right here that's a little bit darker, see where Oak Lake is? My cursor's right there at Oak Lake. And then this shaded area represents the basin of Lake Hind. Now, what I'm going to call your attention to is a couple of things. These are spillways. You see these darker areas? You think, okay, those are rivers. Well, they're rivers, yeah, but what you're seeing here is actually oversized valleys that the rivers are flowing, and you're not really seeing the rivers at this scale. But notice here from Lake Hind, you've got a spillway flowing out this way to the southeast, and you got another one flowing out this way to the southwest. You've got this interesting Turtle Mountain upland right here. You got another one, kind of almost a partner to it, right up here as well. And notice over here, you've got a couple of these dark valley-like things here. So coming across, we've got one here, we've got one here, we've got one here. We got this one we can trace right back up to seeing it emanating from this darker area, which was the basin of Lake Hind. Now, up here above, notice that we have this darker channelized areas. We got a couple of them converging together here, coming together. And here I've superimposed an approximate map of Lake Hind. So you can see what we got here is a channel where water is flowing in, and here we've got water flowing out. And right over here was the Laurentide ice sheet. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to look in this area. Let's back up one. We're going to look in this area right up in here where the Assiniboine River loops down. We saw that map earlier, and we're going to see some of the features that are on the floor of that. Now, the distance across here, each of these squares is 1 mile square, so you can figure that the distance across here is probably close to, well, let's see. It's probably 10 miles across this whole complex here. You can see where the squares are the agricultural fields, and then you can see that they commence back here. You see the geometric regularity. But then in this zone between here, you see there's no agriculture being practiced because this is a massive erosional feature here. And notice the branching, how these flows parted and then flowed back together. Notice that there's a major channel down the middle of the complex here, and it has a river winding in it. That's the Assiniboine River.
What's the flow direction?
In this case, the flow direction is from left to right.
Left to right. Okay, that's what I was thinking because of the smaller channels. Yeah.
And we're going to be seeing a lot of these kinds of shapes right here. These kind of streamlined forms. Look at where my cursor is right here. See this kind of almost streamlined forms?
Yeah, in the middle of the erosional parts. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at a Google map. And here you can see, again, the underfit. Notice that you have a bank right here. You've got another bank right here. That's the channel width. And then here's the river flowing in it. This is the Cirrus Spillway, just north of the U.S.-Canadian border. It says down here at the bottom, note large-scale SERs. Kyle, what are SERs?
Simulated erosional regions. I don't know.
Well, now it was streamlined.
Serious.
You're close.
Erosional regions.
Streamlined erosional residuals.
Okay.
All right. So there are.
I was trying to throw something out as fast as possible.
But you were thinking that, weren't you? Streamlined erosion residuals. It just came out.
Yeah. I just got. Yeah, I was definitely thinking that.
Okay, well, and then it says, so let us do what it says here. Let us note the large-scale streamlined erosional residuals. Here's one right here, bounded by this single contour line. Right here, you can see it. That is a streamlined form. It is, you see, when water flows and it erodes, it's trying to minimize the amount of hydrologic or hydraulic drag. And it does this by creating these fluvial forms, these aerodynamically shaped forms, just as in ship or boat design, that the idea is to minimize the frictional drag, the hydraulic frictional drag of the object moving through the water. Well, it doesn't matter whether the object is moving through the water or the water is moving past the object. The tendency is to erode whatever it's eroding into a form that offers the least resistance, right? Well, it turns out that there's a very consistent type of a shape. And you'll notice there's actually two streamlined forms here, a larger one bounded by this contour line. Do you see me going around it with my cursor? Yep. And then a smaller one next to it. So for a short while, you can see here there was a channel flow through here. Main one came down here, and even the main one, the even more main one came down here and deepened this the most because that's the one the river now occupies. But you could almost think that for a temporary period of time during this flood, these things would have been like islands. Initially, at the initial peak discharge, they were probably submerged. In fact, I think it's almost certain they were submerged. But as water levels declined, they would have then emerged from the floods as islands. And then eventually, once the ice was gone, the floods ended. And so now you had a whole new ecological regime moving in to colonize this recently vacated landscape. Here is a Cirrus Spillway view to the north. This is wow. Very similar to what we were just looking at. You see here the streamlined form.
I see it.
Almost in the shape of a boat or a canoe hull, right? And then here's the Serous River. And you can actually see over here, this where you've got the plowed fields and stuff, that's the edge of the spillway over here. And then on this side, you see the same thing. So you can see the whole spillway is several miles across, whereas here's the river flowing in it. This river did not create the spillway. It's just using the opportunity to occupy the spillway.
Right.
It did not create the spillway. Okay, so now let's go back up to Lake Hind and look at something that I think is quite interesting. I mean, Lake Oak Lake, which is now the last remnant of Lake Hind. And what do we immediately notice?
There's a nice arcuate form there on the right side of.
Oh, you noticed that too?
Yeah.
Aha.
Yeah.
We
better wrap it up here. I think we lost Kronos.
All right. Well, there's more to get into on Lake Hind and what's going on there. So we'll pick that up next episode.
All right.
So we will stop share. Oh my gosh. You guys weren't kidding.
No, I'm serious.
You were serious.
I was definitely not joking.
We lost Kronos.
Well,
there he is. We're wrapping it up, Brad. How are you feeling?
Let's go.
What time are we at?
About that time. So good.
All right. Well, that was a great show on Lake Hind and the other stuff. So I can't wait to get into the rest of it next week.
Well, yeah, because what we'll do is we'll pick up, like I was talking about, we'll start looking at some of these amazing spillways.
Yeah.
And I've got a map showing all the spillways, and we'll see if we can just see any patterns in there.
All right.
That might tell us something. But I found that quite interesting, that arcuate feature there on Oak Lake. Need to look into that further. I mean, is it purely natural? If it is, Couldn't be artificial. I mean, why would somebody do that? Hey, let's go make part of that lake round. That'd be cool. Let's go out there and spend $20 million and make part of that lake round.
Yeah.
I don't know. No, really it must be natural, right?
It's got to be natural. Yeah, I think so.
Well,
so what is the natural cause is the question, right?
Well, remember the direction of the flow?
Yes.
Now, if you go back and you look at it, right, it's the southeastern quadrant where you've still got the arc preserved. The northwestern is obscured, which would have been the influx of. Yeah, that might be what we're looking at, boys.
That's freaking cool, man.
It is cool.
Let's dive.
Canoe and dive.
Canoe and
man.
Dive.
This is definitely some canoeing.
And check out the birds.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some cool birds on Oak Lake.
Yep. Mosquitoes.
Oh, maybe so. But if we drove up there, we could go by Big Stone Lake on our way up.
That'd be great.
I could easily see spending a week to 10 days out there. And you guys, by the end of our next episode, you'll be going, yeah, we got to spend a week or 10 days out there checking out these spillways. It's some pretty interesting stuff. Not quite as spectacular as what's behind Brad, but as we suspect, part of the same event.
Same event.
I think I'll just like to get a spear and some Birkenstocks and just stand out there with the birds.
I think that would be appropriate.
I think it would be phenomenal.
Yeah, that would be appropriate.
In a loincloth?
Yes, a butt flap.
Butt flap and a spear and Birkenstocks.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay, so we're gonna make this happen.
Okay.
We're gonna head up there, Big Stone Lake. So we'll make sure that we've got a little bag packed with
the butt flaps and the spears and the Birkenstocks.
And the Birkenstocks, yeah.
And I'll see you guys back at the hotel.
Right.
Oh,
it's gonna change your life, Mike.
Change your life.
Well, he wouldn't be normal guy anymore then.
That's true. We might need.
He'd be part of the wild bunch.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think that was a great show, Randall.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
As always, it's a pleasure.
Everyone can get a hold of us, cosmographia1618@gmail.com. Everything else is in the show notes, all the links, the descriptions, keywords. Check them out. Thanks to Brad.
And the website, hopefully by the time you're watching this, the website's going to be live.
Yeah.
And all of this is going to be posted there, plus a bunch of other stuff. It's going to be pretty cool. Pretty awesome.
Right. Absolutely.
Yep.
Excellent. Till next week, gentlemen. Great show.
Good night, guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you all.